Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to give you a quick download on the crypto world for the week of April 14th to the 20th, 2025.
Yeah, we've sifted through a market report, looked at the prices, the news,
Hmm.
basically trying to save you the trouble.
Exactly. No need to get bogged down. We want to pull out the really important stuff, the core insights, nice and efficient.
Get you up to speed fast.
Okay, so looking at the big picture. Well, a few things really jumped out this week. Solana, for one, had a massive week. Bitcoin was, pretty steady.
Right, stable.
And then the other altcoins, kind of a mixed bag, really, plus some interesting institutional moves and regulatory chat happening.
Definitely. There were some, let's say, surprising moments and connections to unpack.
Let's dive right in then, Solana. The report flagged a huge 17% gain for the week.
Yeah, huge. I mean, compared to Bitcoin and Ethereum, it really outperformed them significantly.
So what was behind that surge? What fueled it?
Well, it looks like a mix of things. Partly technical upgrades, like Coinbase making some system improvements related to Solana. That always helps accessibility.
Okay, makes sense.
But maybe the bigger news was Canada launching its first Solana ETF, an exchange-traded fund.
Ah, the ETF effect. That allows more traditional investors in, right, without them actually holding the SOL token.
Exactly, and that clearly gave investor confidence a major boost. You saw Solana's market cap jump up past $60 billion.
Wow, over 60 billion.
It really signals that investors are, looking beyond just the top two for diversification.
Yeah.
And maybe paves the way for other altcoin ETFs too.
Interesting. And it wasn't just these big external factors, was it? The Solana ecosystem itself played a part.
Oh, for sure. You can't separate the price from the underlying activity. The whole Solana ecosystem is buzzing.
Like the meme coins.
Yeah, the meme coin scene is still active, but also look at Solaxy. It's a layer 2 project on Solana aiming to improve speed and costs.
Okay.
They had a pre-sale, raised $29 million, and then their token jumped like 40–50% this week.
40 to 50%. That's substantial.
Right. It feeds that whole Ethereum killer narrative. Plus, they're offering this really high-staking yield, 137% APY.
137% APY. Okay, that definitely grabs attention.
No kidding. The report calls it whale interest, basically attracting big money investors looking for those kinds of returns.
And there was more institutional interest beyond the Canadian ETF too, wasn't there? Grayscale.
Yes, good point. Grayscale, the big investment firm, they filed paperwork for their own Solana ETF in the U.S.
Another big signal.
Absolutely. It just adds to that bullish feeling around SOL and really boosts its appeal to institutional players. Shows how traditional finance is looking at these different crypto assets now.
Okay, so Solana's story is pretty clear. Upgrades, ecosystem buzz, and major institutional nods. Let's switch to Bitcoin. It was much quieter, right? A tiny gain.
Yeah, very different story. Bitcoin saw just a 0.4% gain, pretty much stable around that $85,000 mark.
So what's the thinking there? Why so stable when Solana was soaring?
Well, the report suggests a couple things. Overall market sentiment seems to be improving a bit. Maybe less worry about those trade negotiations. And you're seeing, a steady flow of new people coming into the market, plus liquidity seems pretty stable.
So kind of holding its ground.
Exactly. The broader crypto market, like the CoinDesk 20 index, was up a little more, about 1.2%. Bitcoin's smaller move kind of reinforces its role as like the market anchor, less volatile.
The safe harbor, maybe, in a choppy sea.
Sort of, yeah. It behaves differently than many of the altcoins.
And there was institutional news for Bitcoin too, though maybe longer term. Charles Schwab.
Right. Schwab aiming to roll out spot Bitcoin trading for their clients, but not immediately. They're targeting April 2026.
So not an instant price mover, but still significant.
Very significant for the long term. It's another huge traditional finance name saying, yes, Bitcoin is an asset our clients want, and we're building the infrastructure for it. Supports that long-term positive outlook.
Okay, so Bitcoin steady, Solana surging. What about Ethereum? It seemed to have a tougher week.
Yeah, ETH was actually down about 2%. It underperformed Solana significantly, and even XRP for part of the week.
Why do you think that was? Competitive pressure.
That seems to be the main factor highlighted. Solana's ecosystem is getting so much attention right now.
Right.
And Ethereum didn't really have any major positive news or catalysts this specific week to counteract that. It's still massive, of course. Market cap around $192 billion.
Still huge.
But the growth just wasn't there this period. It shows how competitive that layer 1 space is.
Definitely a reminder that nobody can rest on their laurels. So beyond the big three, what about the wider altcoin market? The report said it was mixed.
Yeah, very mixed. It wasn't like everything was down just because Ethereum was. The market seems quite selective.
Any winners besides Solana?
Well, Tron did okay, up nearly 4%. Maybe just network growth, keeping it steady.
Well,
Avalanche also saw a decent rise, maybe 5–7%. That's probably linked to DeFi activity. And it's also in that CoinDesk 20 index, which was up overall.
gotcha. And the losers.
Well, XRP had a small gain initially, but then kind of cooled off into pretty flat or slightly up. Still has a big market cap, over $100 billion. But then you had others like Chainlink, Cardano, even Dogecoin. They were all down maybe 2–5%.
So a bit of consolidation, people maybe taking profits or shifting focus.
Seems like it. Investors might be concentrating on specific stories right now, like the Solana ecosystem, rather than a broad altcoin rally. Performance is really tied to individual project news and momentum.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's shift to some broader news items. The Bank for International Settlements, the BIS, put out a warning.
Yeah, the BIS, they're often seen as like the central bank for central banks. They issued a report warning about crypto risks.
What kind of risks?
The usual suspects, really. Potential financial instability, concerns about crypto widening economic inequality, standard concerns from traditional finance bodies.
But how was that received?
Well, interestingly, the president of CoinFund, that's a crypto investment firm, pushed back pretty hard, called the report uninformed and dangerous.
So the classic TradFi versus crypto debate continues.
Exactly. It highlights that fundamental disagreement about crypto's role and impact. These reports don't always move prices immediately, but they definitely feed into the regulatory conversation.
Always something to watch. Okay, one more piece of data. Stablecoins. There was a big inflow into FDUSD.
Yeah, $170 million flowed into the FDUSD stablecoin, which is interesting because the report also mentioned general outflows from the broader crypto market.
So money leaving crypto overall but flowing into a stablecoin, what does that suggest?
It usually suggests a bit of caution. People might be taking profits from volatile assets and parking them in stablecoins, which are pegged to, say, the US dollar.
Waiting on the sidelines.
Could be. Or waiting for lower prices to buy back in. It shows that even with excitement around things like Solana, some part of the market is playing it safe, looking for stability, risk aversion.
Right. So let's quickly wrap up the key takeaways for everyone listening.
Okay.
Solana was clearly the star this week. Big gains driven by ETF news, ecosystem stuff like Solaxy.
Dominant performance.
Bitcoin showed resilience, acted like that market anchor around 85K, supported by long-term institutional interests like Schwab.
Steady Eddie.
Ethereum struggled a bit comparatively, faced pressure from Solana, lacked its own strong catalysts this week.
Yeah, felt the heat.
And the rest of the altcoins were a real mix. Some winners like Tron and Avalanche, some losers like Link, ADA, DOGE. Very selective market.
Driven by specific narratives.
And then we had the BIS warning highlighting regulatory friction and stablecoin inflows suggesting some investor caution. It really shows how fast things move, doesn't it?
Absolutely. A dynamic week.
So a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Given how differently Solana and Ethereum performed this week, what might that mean long term? Thinking about that layer one competition, how the whole crypto ecosystem might evolve?
That's a great question. How do things like tech advancements, all this new institutional money coming in, and whatever regulators decide to do, how does all that shape which platforms win out in the future?
Exactly. Something to mull over. That wraps up this deep dive into the crypto market. Hope it gave you a quick, clear picture of the week.
Yeah, hope it was helpful.
Join us next time as we tackle another set of sources and keep exploring this ever-changing world.